Digital identity, a key to inclusive growth and empowerment. This panel discussion shall tackle the current challenges and solution models based on digital identity to usher social inclusion and next phase of inclusive growth for residents, irrespective of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, or disability, and empower them to participate in society and help them shape their own future. This session will be moderated by Mr. Sumnesh Joshi, who is Deputy Director General of Regional Office Mumbai, UIDAI. I request Mr. Sumnesh Joshi to come over. Mr. Sumnesh Joshi is an Indian Telecom Service Officer, presently posted as DDG RO Mumbai. He has deep knowledge of various governance projects, schemes, and driving the use of Aadhaar, a digital identity in e-governance for DBT and beneficiary identifications. He has been playing an important role to reap the benefits of Jan Dhan Aadhaar Mobile Trinity, JAM Trinity, to boost the digital economy. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Deepali, and good morning to everyone and warm welcome. So today we are here to discuss digital identity, a key for inclusive growth and empowerment. And for this panel, we have eminent speakers. I would like to invite them. First, I would like to invite Dr. Neeraj Mittal. Please give me a round of applause. That is IAS Officer 1992 batch, currently Principal Secretary, Government of Tamil Nadu, and is instrumental in the PAHEL, the world's largest cash transfer for LPG subsidy and give up campaign. And his previous assignment, he worked with the World Bank as a senior advisor, and he has extensive experience in policy formulation and execution in the e-governance. So welcome, Dr. Neeraj Mittal. Thank you. And now I would like to invite the second speaker, Dr. Pawan Bakhshi. He is the India Country Lead Financial Services for Poor program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Please give him a round of applause. Where he works to broaden the reach of low-cost digital financial services for the poor, and he is considered a pioneer in the digital financial services and co-creator of India's first mobile wallet, Airtel Money. Welcome, Dr. Bakhshi. I would like to invite now our speaker number 3, Dr. Tina George. She is Senior Social Protection Specialist from the World Bank, and she is also a regional team leader for West Africa Unique Identification. And her work lies at the intersection of the poverty, governance, and technology, and focuses on delivering services to the poor and vulnerable. Please welcome Dr. Tina. Now I would like to invite our fourth panelist, Dr. K.P. Vinod. He is the Managing Director, Alliance and Government Partnership at the Nudge Foundation, a development action-based NGO that is focused on the poverty, elevation, and livelihood. With a background in public policy information system, his interests are at the intersection of government and market, where large-scale changes can be facilitated through alignment of policy, technology, and practice. So welcome, Mr. Vinod. Thank you very much for joining us. So we'll start this panel discussion just to set the context. And already in session 1, speakers told, and yesterday we heard Honorable Minister, he spoke about the inclusive development, that is, inclusive development, that's Antodaya, that is to serve the farthest person in the society, that's the last one in the queue. And even the current budget has a focus on the human capital, inclusive development, social infrastructure, and women empowerment. And expenditure on the social services, education, health, and other social sectors by state and center combined, around 8.8% of GDP in 2021. And there are many welfare schemes, policy that is launched by the government, and many schemes, social security codes, Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana. So government, and further government has set a target to make India a $1 trillion digital economy in the coming few years. So role of inclusive growth and empowerment of the people is very, very important. And even the United Nations is one of the sustainable development goal has written that to provide the identification for the all. But India has shown the world the way by providing Aadhaar a unique digital ID that is verifiable ID. And using the Aadhaar, government already started direct benefit transfers, and many services are being delivered using the JAM, that is Jandan, Aadhaar, and mobile. And now, how to take it forward in the next 10 years? What innovation we can do so we can have the minimum government and the maximum governance? How to ensure Antodaya to reach out the most vulnerable section of the society? How we can expedite further the use of identity to fuel the inclusive growth and empowerment, thereby to boost the digital economy. And in the audience, we have the participants from the central, state government, foreign embassies, fintech companies, academicians. So I do hope that everyone will get benefited by the discussion over here. So I will start the discussion. Thank you. Hello, 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 hello. Yeah, okay, thank you. So just to start, so I will request first Dr. Neeraj Mittal, because he has initiated the direct benefit transfer in the LPG, which was part of the first huge case of Aadhaar, and LPG DBT, sir, is a great success. So we'd like to hear from you what are the key takeaways that you like to share to implement any DBT scheme.
Thank you, Sumnesh. I am really ecstatic to be here because I've seen Aadhaar grow from when we had a penetration of 5%, 10% to 99.5% today in the adult population. Any DBT program, I think we should not look at it as a technological challenge. The LPG program itself was about 130 million people who had to be enrolled. At that scale of program, we had to seed the Aadhaar numbers. So the technology was only a 10% of our problem. Of course, but we did not lose sight that we had to do a BPR. We should not exactly just replicate what is happening in the physical world. But the main challenge was managing the change, right? Loss of power, loss of revenue to some people. How do you bring different stakeholders together? So we had two strategies, right? One is to increase the support to the change, and then of course the next was to reduce resistance to change. The Honorable Prime Minister gave tremendous support to this program, and that visible support by sending messages to people, by being on the television, messaging. A great IEC program was launched to reduce, to bring this support to the benefits of this, to public policy, to these stakeholders. We celebrated low-hanging fruits. Of course, this is one of the programs which appears in the Guinness Book of Records. Anyway, anything done in India can appear in Guinness Book, so that's not something which is very, I can't take the claim for that. But in terms of reducing resistance to change, I think that was the key learnings. Incrementalism, you couldn't roll this out suddenly all across country in one shot. We had, some districts where we had high penetration of Aadhaar. So we took a phased manner, tightened the screws slowly over several, months, several phases. For example, LPG distributors, we realized their income would come down. So we had to, work on commissions, improving their commissions. We thought of officers who had to do this work as an extra work. The LPG officials are supposed to just deliver LPG. They're not supposed to be doing this work. We linked it to their performance evaluation program. When we realized that people might have to give the first cylinder which comes to them, have to pay the full price. We said, okay, we'll give you the first subsidy in advance, even without, getting the first cylinder. So we had to look at each stakeholder separately. We allowed for bank accounts to be optional, Aadhaar not mandatory in the initial days. We had multiple enrollment options for, putting this together. So I think the main message I want to give is, look this as a people's problem, not a technology problem.
Neeraj, and just I will invite Dr. Amitabh Kant. Maybe I request, sir, if you can join us on the dais, sir, while maybe panel discussion is on, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So now, as Dr. Mittal told that whatever we have to do, we have to put the people in our mind, and the business process re-engineering is of the utmost important. And for the DBT transfer, of course, the bank account is the platform. So, and to open the bank account, the Aadhaar-enabled payment service is being used, creating the banking and wallet platform to enable the future cashless transaction. So what type of challenges, this is my question to Dr. Pawan Bakhshi, because you are working in this financial sector. So what type of challenges you are witnessing in the AEPS, and how can we further strengthen it?
Thank you, Sumnesh. I think the first thing I'd like to congratulate is coming up with a system like AEPS, right? It's an amazing tool for the poor people, serving the poor in the rural, very rural districts, which is what we call as the frontiers and the oases. It's not just difficult, it's also expensive. And the interoperability offered by AEPS actually truly helps to serve those communities. We should also think about AEPS at two other levels. The first level is shared infrastructure. What can a large country like us offer in terms of shared infrastructure to help a lot of poor people reach and get access to things that they should otherwise have got without paying a premium for it? So shared infrastructure is extremely important. And we've seen that happening in the telco world as well, because the moment they started to share infrastructure, the usage suddenly exploded, right? I think that's one. The other thing is also seeing that distribution is a public good, right? It suddenly opened up a lot of points of distribution across rural areas, and most importantly, try to reduce costs. Just imagine if in a population of less than 5,000 people in a village, we had 5 business correspondents, they would probably all be unviable. But having just one interoperable agent there has actually helped serve the cause of the people, reduce costs of transactions that make the BC very viable. Right? While we've seen in the last few months during the pandemic how the AEPS actually helped serve the people on the ground and allowed them to do cash outs and other areas and stuff like that, I think what we saw was some error rates and failure rates, maybe not because of Aadhaar, but because of other loops in the system. But we should be looking at it end to end to say how do we reduce that, and I think that work's already happening. I think one of the key areas which we should be looking at is today AEPS is not contactless. The pandemic has taught us that to put a fingerprint on the same device again and again and again and again, and the ability to clean that device again remains a challenge. So is there a way by which we can use contactless, whether it's facial recognition or iris, to update this and stuff like that? I'll give an example of Bangladesh as an example where bKash has started to use facial recognition in opening financial accounts for their people. Why can't we do this here? Same with Bhim Aadhaar Pay. Bhim Aadhaar Pay could also be facial, and a lot of other people could do this. And here is a nudge for the UIDAI. Can we work on regulation of facial recognition technology to empower poor? And the UIDAI could actually be leading this globally if we started now and accelerated this work.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Bakhshi. So you rightly pointed out that the contactless that maybe in the pandemic that we have learned, and the distribution of the public good. So now DBT is happening and the bank accounts are getting opened with the AEPS. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Tina, that World Bank has been emphasized the need of the digital identity for the inclusive growth and the empowerment. And of course, India has given the resident the identity, the Aadhaar. But with the technological advancement of the India's Aadhaar platforms, how do you see this translating into the inclusive economic growth and the empowerment?
Thank you. And first of all, it's really great to be here. Thank you to the Government of India, to the Unique Identification Authority, on behalf of the World Bank's Human Development Practice Group and Social Protection and Jobs as well. So it's really wonderful. Thank you. I've actually been, let me just take a quick step here and say I've actually been following the Aadhaar journey since the early days. And in fact, I remember sitting up late in Indonesia about 10, 12 years ago to listen to Mr. Nilekani and our former president, Jim Kim, have a conversation about Aadhaar. And then quizzing Pramod, who I guess has now left, on the architecture. So it's really a privilege to be here to talk about Aadhaar 2.0 once again. Thank you. So as pioneers and innovators, you are on the cusp of the next generation of government delivery systems. And in my mind, you have achieved this incredible feat of giving 1.3 billion individuals government-recognized unique identity. And if we think about inclusive growth fueled by Aadhaar 2.0, what that means to us would be really thinking about pushing the boundaries on health, education, social protection, and thinking about the poor in a way that eases access without really excluding people. A lot of the things that we talked about this morning. And just thinking about inclusive growth, what we talk about is something called the first mile approach. And we discussed this earlier today, where we tend to think of the poor and we tend to think of the vulnerable as the last mile. But really, we're in the business of serving people and households. They are our first mile, and we should be thinking of them from a human-centered design approach. They should be our first mile. So we're not in the business of provisioning infrastructure. So that's what you would think of the last mile.
So great, Dr. Krishna. So maybe we would like to hear maybe in the second round more about the first mile approach. And now, Dr. KP Vinod, that we are witnessing the use of digital means for getting various services which would bring the value to the individual and value to the society as well. So what about societal transformation that is taking place, and where does Aadhaar plays a role? So your comment.
First, thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's a privilege to be here. I'm also a big fan of the UIDAI program. We have created the largest social information infrastructure in the world, and I think we should be proud about it. What we've also done in the process is, in a society that is so disparate, we have still managed to bring everybody together. I think there are pockets of exclusion, but that is an ongoing process. So the question is, what is exactly happening? I mean, if you're reading sociologists like Daniel Bell or Antonio Negri, we have already moved into the information society age. We're already there. The question is, how completely are we there? So I think it should make us pause and think that we have created this huge infrastructure. How do we transition it to the next level of being an information society? I think one of the fundamental things is, I think what Tina also pointed out, I think we need to change governance entirely. First, we need to know that this is the only way we can govern 1.5 billion people, and the only way to automate governance is to use foundational identity, which is uniquely given to you because you're a person living in this state. Once we get that, I think it is the basis for completely transforming governance. I also think Amitabh Kanchi has been talking about digitization to digitalization. I think that's the state where Aadhaar is right now. We need to move from digitization, which you've done, and we need to move to digitalization, which means make Aadhaar mobile. I think one of the previous panelists has been talking about it and alluding to it, I think Mr. Pramod Verma, and we need to make Aadhaar mobile. If we talk about empowerment and we talk about technology, we cannot solve for going to a lower equilibrium. We have to solve for a higher equilibrium. So I'll rest my case. This is the transformation taking place. India is going to be completely mobile, and it's a question of bringing everybody on board, and UIDAI will be the program that does it.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod. So it's really make Aadhaar mobile is the key thing that, So now I will again go back to Dr. Neeraj Mittal, because we want to expand the use of Aadhaar, and typically when we talk about the inclusive growth and for the schemes for the marginalized people and most vulnerable people. So, and after the post-amendment Aadhaar Act, now we have empowered that the state government can also issue the notifications, and you are in the government of Tamil Nadu. So can you just elaborate what any state scheme that you have notified under that, and what type of challenges you are seeing in implementation of those?
Thanks, Sumnesh. I think it's the Section 7 is really a very, very critical section for all the states to see their programs in a holistic manner wherever state subsidies are involved. For example, in Tamil Nadu, the PDS, the Public Distribution System, the Tamil Nadu Skill Development Corporation, and a couple of others have already embarked on this notification process. The state government has also, uniquely, I think, I'm not aware of any such initiative, nominated one agency under the IT department to be the data fiduciary for the entire state of Tamil Nadu, which means all the departments have been mandated to share their data compulsorily. It's a big problem. Even in government, people are not ready to share their data because they feel loss of control, loss of, what might tumble out of their skeleton. I mean, some skeletons may tumble out of their cupboards. So there are issues which, and this has been recognized. Section 7 enables me to really look at my entire beneficiary in a single view across departments, and that really is the key to success. I see challenges in three ways. One is capacity. So when we tell a department, okay, you have to do the Section 7, many of them are still not aware. What is the Section 7, what benefits might get, and this is related to the change management issue, right? The people's issue, the fear of unknown as to what will happen. Second, of course, is the administrative issues like having the sanction, having the funding for doing these change. You might have to actually create fields in the databases which falls into the technical challenges. You might have to talk to a system integrator. You'll have to create some APIs, and the entire ecosystem has to change. And these really give us some issues to solve when a department goes in, and these are what we are trying to address as we move along. I think the last thing is you asked about benefits, and I see them in three categories, right? First is really the quality of benefits. They can be faster, they can, you can reduce exclusion errors, and you can also reduce inclusion errors. Cost, you can increase fiscal space by almost, I don't know, LPG we saved, I think, some 10 to 15 to 20% of subsidies, so increase the fiscal space for social welfare programs. And then, of course, the quality of benefits. You can give it faster, it's reliable, it's trustworthy, and, the beneficiaries are really happy. So I think we thank UIDAI for having this amendment.
So thank you, Dr. Mittal, and you rightly pointed out that maybe we have to have a system where whenever any scheme is being launched, and maybe the moment we launch the scheme, the beneficiary already identified and the benefit will go the next moment. So maybe this is the future. So now over to again Dr. KP Vinod, that because you have talked about the overall inclusion, the societal perspective. So because government is committed to the minimum government and the maximum governance. So now how do we govern 1 billion people, and how could we have a fast-tracking governance through this digital identity Aadhaar?
We've already set up an infrastructure. The question is, how do we use it? I think it is one of the largest public investments we have done in the recent past. We have moved from, the only other infrastructure projects that are going on at this kind of scale is hard infrastructure, material infrastructure. But I want to, take one or two examples. If you want to disintermediate government, and the only way you can do it is to remove the focus on the government office being the center for governance. I think a large part of transactions can happen over giving data on the mobile phone. If you can do it over banking, if you can do it over UPI, then you should be able to do, because most of these things are rule-based. The other thing that, which is very important, and we find that if you don't make it mobile, you will have a problem in a crisis. People say that we can't respond to a crisis. The whole idea, the definition of a crisis is that institutional mechanisms cannot respond. That is the definition of a crisis. So how do we solve for responding to a crisis? We can only solve if each person is empowered to use his identity and to respond to government and say, I need this help. Which is why I say Aadhaar is a positive claim on government resources and services. On the flip side, Aadhaar is the basis for government finding out how well they did in the social programs that they offer. And government has two ways of working with you. One is to work on a regular basis, and one is to work on an emergency. Government continues to be the largest provider of services in the country. and in any country for that matter. They're also the largest monopoly provider of services. The only way you can manage monopoly services is by making it open governance and making it completely transparent. And I think that is what making Aadhaar mobile, working with the digital locker, will do. I think ID4D has already identified this, and I think the MOSIP program that we offer and we are taking to other countries is part of that initiative. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Vinod. So maybe you talked about the overall the empowerment and to reap the benefit of the digital identity platform, Aadhaar. So thank you very much. And now I go to Dr. Bakhshi again, that financial inclusion, is a very key factor, for the digital economy and to inclusive growth. So how Aadhaar can further help it to make India a $1 trillion digital economy, and how the private sector entities can create various low-cost investment product using Aadhaar, because you are working this space, and there's a huge potential. It's not only the opening of the bank account, but per se the overall financial inclusion, that's the investment products. Maybe why not one can have the mutual fund account? So can you just throw light on this aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, when we talk of low-cost products, we must also appreciate that the fact that Aadhaar has actually reduced cost of onboarding. So in the physical world, the cost of KYC, in the paper world, used to be about 600 to 700 rupees per KYC. If that had continued, we would not have seen such rapid acceleration in inclusion in the country, but Aadhaar dropped it to a few rupees. And that made the poor people also viable for banks to serve and other financial institutions to serve. Now that's a very, very important aspect of this entire story, and we should not acknowledge it, I think. So that's really important. I think the other thing, as we are talking about, is RBI has just announced that some of the regulated entities can now use eKYC, and I think that's going to have an impact on how people are onboarded and new services which can be offered. So I think that's a great move. But I think more important than that, there is another thing which Aadhaar can utilize, and I'd love to open that up for a conversation. That how can Aadhaar use privacy-preserving knowledge sharing? And I'll give you an example of this, that if a person has been authenticated by 6 lenders in the last 3 days, can that information be used to reduce the risk of NPAs to a lender and the fear of over-indebtedness to the consumer? Now that's very important. In a similar way, you could have said that AS Health was talking about in the morning, that if we realize that the same person has been asked to do an MRI by 4 different doctors in the last 1 month, is it worth it? Right? And can we therefore help improve the lives of the consumer or the residents as we talk about it? There is also another thing which Aadhaar is capable of today, which is using its tokenization capability, right? And can we therefore use that with a zero knowledge proof to say, as an example, proving that you're age capable of buying alcohol without revealing everything that on your Aadhaar, right? That's one. And plus 2, if we are able to just use single authentication once and redo this for every time the person needs to buy an investment or a mutual fund or an insurance and everything else, why do you need to do authentication again and again? I mean, for a simple reason, we could also be thinking of that the UPI transaction already is authenticated. It's with a bank. Can we formulate a way that that transaction carries the secure, non-tamperable, authorization for the person to make a next transaction without providing any additional identity? Right? Why do we need to keep repeating stuff? The moment we stop repeating stuff, we'll reduce costs. And that will become open to a lot of other people who might otherwise be struggle to provide identification in different areas. How do we start providing guidance and services to folks in the gig economy? Right? That is going to explode, right? So and Nandan also spoke about it yesterday, from the time that they are acquired, they get trained, they work elsewhere, how do we store all that information and utilize for the benefit of the consumer herself and of the institutions that they work with, right? I would say Aadhaar is the biggest enabler in our ecosystem in the country today. I mean, not just in the country, actually, even globally. And we need to be able to innovatively use that to serve the last woman standing. And I specify women is because when we say our technology is gender agnostic, it means it's usually is designed for men. And I wanted to highlight that to say that when we start designing things by using Aadhaar and other services, we must also design for the women who use it, who face a lot of challenges as they go along in life.
So thank you, Dr. Bakhshi, and the comment that yes, the technology is the gender agnostic. So, and of course, we have to work a lot for the empowerment, particularly the women, and the idea, the privacy preserving, knowledge sharing is a great idea. So maybe we'll take it forward. So now coming to Dr. Tina, we have so many welfare schemes, and but still, the people are not coming forward, so maybe they are not aware, so low take-up issues. And when we term it, it's simply a last mile problem. Maybe something is not working. So, but as you rightly pointed out, that World Bank is propagating the first mile framework approach. So now you can elaborate about this and how Aadhaar can be integrated in the first mile approach.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Mr. Joshi. So the first mile framework, and so let me just tell you a little bit more about this. And I'm going to touch on 3 points. So the first point is on being able to prioritize the poor and vulnerable. The second is on a framework level issue, and the third is on dynamism. So I'm going to touch on these 3 issues as they relate to social protection or welfare schemes, as you've just referred to. The first is on prioritizing the poor, and so how do you improve that take-up to prioritize the poor? And there was, I think the first panel touched on this a little bit today as well, which is the outreach and the communications. The poor need to know what can they do with this unique identifier. So they have to know, if I have this unique identifier with a QR code, then should I be able to go apply for a social protection program? Should I be able to go, assess my eligibility? Which actually brings me to the second part, which is the framework that I was talking about. Unique identification is only one part, and I think, again, the panel this morning referred to it. It's a layered approach, and this is the beauty of the approach. And so in the same way that we talked about health and how health and that whole health ecosystem can be built on top of it, we can think of building the social protection delivery platform sitting on top of the unique identifier using this framework. So the framework is, first you establish uniqueness, and then the next thing is you have to assess socioeconomic needs and conditions of individuals, families, and households. Once you assess their needs and conditions, then you decide whether individuals or households are eligible for programs, and then you provide, which is you pay either in cash or cashless or in-kind services such as food, and then you manage this whole process. So this whole process we've laid out, and it's called the Social Protection Delivery Systems Framework. I have one more point, if you can bear with me. And so the third point is on dynamism. And this is about that whole layered approach that we were talking about. So you have Aadhaar, which is the unique identifier. And so what can Aadhaar enable for social protection? And what Aadhaar can enable is it enables dynamic social registries to happen. By dynamic social registries, what I mean is that all around the world, not just in India, by the way, in several countries around the world, the assessment of socioeconomic data is largely happening through outdated static data and surveys. It's not up to date. And Neeraj touched on this a little bit about the sharing of information amongst different departments. Let's just take the example of Turkey, for instance. They have a system called Bütünleşik, and what Bütünleşik does is you bring your unique identifier to a Vakıf, which is the local foundation, and then the Vakıf then queries 24 different databases and brings up a pre-qualification profile on you to see are you poor and vulnerable or not, and then they put you through the process of the decision making and providing the payments, etc. So there is not a simple framework saying you identify a person and then they're automatically registered and you pay. No, there's actually something in between, and that whole state machinery in between is the SP or the social protection delivery systems, and they need to be dynamic. And to me, Aadhaar 2.0 is about enabling these dynamic social registries and SP delivery platforms, and that's a wonderful way to go in my view. Thank you.
So thank you, Tina, the suggestion that we should have a dynamic social registry using the digital identity, Aadhaar. Now, Aadhaar is online verifiable or offline verification we can do using the QR code. So, Dr. Pawan Bakhshi, because Aadhaar you can authenticate and verify it offline. So, what type of innovation do you see for the delivery of various services in the coming time, and what you would like to tell the entities that when they are going to design any solution around this Aadhaar offline and online verification?
The Gates Foundation has partnered with the Alan Turing Institute in UK on trusted digital infrastructure for identity systems. They've conducted initial work in the area, and they've realized that there are 6 key requirements which are coming out, which is security, privacy, ethics, resilience, robustness, and reliability. The key challenge is that there has to be assurance that the data has not been tampered with while in storage or computation or in transit. And given the importance of identity verification that we have in providing access to resources and services, resilience must be built in to cope with and recover from unseen events. One way to learn from this is about non-tamperable QR codes, which the UIDAI is doing already. But unfortunately, it's only on smartphones, right? We still have a large population of people who have no phones or who have feature phones. Can we take the QR codes as an example on a feature phone? And what will it take us to do that? Now, there are some arguments which says that we are accelerating to get smartphones, and in the next couple of years or a decade, we will have all smartphones. But I'm asking the question saying, how long will that take? And what do we do in the intervening period? Do we exclude these people? And my answer is no, we shouldn't be excluding them, and we should be working on them. The other use case could be a sign-on capability, right? So we are seeing today apps and websites and other things ask for LinkedIn IDs, Facebook IDs, email IDs to sign on. Why can't we have Aadhaar as a sign-on? It just needs an OTP, right, on your phone. On top of that, there are apps like a Google Authenticator. Why can't we have an Aadhaar Authenticator app? Again, it's tokenized, right? Just try and imagine that almost 1.3 billion to 1.5 billion in the next few years, which is a very large part of the population in the world, will have an app like this, which can be very powerful as a tool and help in social kind of design for this. The other is all the government websites which engage with people. Like you said, why can't we have a single sign-on using Aadhaar for anything that an individual resident wants to engage with the citizen? Why do you need a registration again and again? Say, what's your phone number, what's your email ID? Just enter an Aadhaar number and start on transactions. I think the one key area which we need to work on, which will work for the poor a lot, and we unfortunately see that happening in India, is that we see a lot of floods, as an example, where Aadhaar cards could get lost. Today, there is no facility for a citizen, if he's lost the card and doesn't remember a number, to get the number again. How do we solve for that? Right? Is there a way of doing that? And I think the last thing I'd like to stop with is by saying that we are calling it digital identity, but except for authentication and authorization, which is digital, everything else is physical still. How do we move from being in the physical world into a digital world is the question which we need to solve in Aadhaar 2.0. Lead the way, leapfrog what other countries are doing. And the last question to all of our friends here, we went and designed Aadhaar in 2009, 2010. A lot of technology has changed, a lot of water has passed under the bridge. The question to ask ourselves is, if we were to design Aadhaar today, what would we change? Right? There are lots of things which we could change, and we should start off with that by saying, here are things which will enable people like us, our friends, our cousins in the rural areas, our native villages, to have a much better, improved lives that they have gone and lived till now. Thank you.
Dr. Bakhshi, of course, the Aadhaar is the platform. So maybe for overall, the digital India or any service, so we have to. So Aadhaar can act as an enabler, right? So thank you very much for your thoughts. And now, Mr. Vinod, what with the technology, the people are getting empowered, and with the digital identity, inclusion is happening. We are seeing the inclusion is happening. And so in the next 10 years, what do you think that, what type of issues the Aadhaar could solve through the informational backbone?
So I think fundamentally in the next 10 years, we've already built that infrastructure that will produce trust in societies. I think big societies can survive only if there's a trust-based mechanism. I mean, that is how societies thrive. And what we have done is already created that. I think what Aadhaar 2.0 should do now is how to make this data available, transparent, mobile, make its use open, and start gaining the benefits of having created such a huge infrastructure. My suggestion would be that we start experimenting. If we don't, and if there are certain conditions like hygiene conditions for privacy, I think they're very important. But I think if we don't experiment with Aadhaar, make it more mobile, make it more accessible, and start, start disintermediating governance, start looking at programs. Let me tell you from our, experience. One of the biggest things that we face as a problem when we start a program is convergence of government schemes. But I think that is a problem that even government grapples with. That is not going to, change by creating Aadhaar. That is going to change by apps that allow you to bring all that information together. So I think we are not going to solve all this by creating one scheme that takes care of everything. We are going to create apps that bring all schemes together so that they can be managed by the individual who's trying to access those schemes. So I think there are very deep benefits out of the infrastructure we created, and I think we should wholly go down that path. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vinod. So, because there's a need of the hour, and of course, we have to ensure that all the security and the privacy concern, and keeping those things in mind, maybe one can design the solution. Now, coming back to Dr. Tina, that any service delivery, the experience of the people or the user is of the utmost importance, and we should have a robust and the convenient system to identify the beneficiary. So, and you described the first mile approach. So, how can India put together first mile approach through Aadhaar to have a human-centered design while making of a scheme in the coming time?
And thank you for that question. It's a really important question. So, in thinking about the first mile approach and human-centered design, what's really important is to think about who are the people that we're trying to serve. What are their pain points? What are their experiences? Are they diverse? Are they homogeneous? And then what kind of programs or delivery processes can be better designed to serve these users? And let me just give you an example of journey mapping, and I'll give you an example of from Indonesia, in fact. So Indonesia has one of the largest cash transfer programs in the world, which is the PKH program. and the Pekapa program scaled up from about 2 million households to about 12 million households. That's about 50 million individuals or so. And then about overnight, all of the cash transfers then went cashless by then being transferred into people's bank accounts. Now, Indonesia is a large country. It's an archipelago with about 17,000 islands and across 3 time zones. And in some of the remote islands, there's probably one of those where we did our field work. There was one ATM on this entire island. And so people have to walk for miles to go pick up cash. And so what's really important, and what the government then realized, is that they needed to journey map to see what are the experiences of the people that they're trying to serve in order to then solve for those problems. And so journey mapping is a really important part of the first mile approach. I'll give you another example and also bring in 2 India examples as well. The other is from the United States and from the state of California, in fact. California has the food stamps program, SNAP, and although it has one of the highest potentially eligible user groups, the take-up is quite low. And one of the reasons why the take-up is quite low is because it's too complicated to apply. You know, again, I was talking about that state machinery in the middle about, you know, how you are assessed for those needs and conditions. And so you have this young person who's part of a civic tech group who then quits his job, becomes homeless for about a year. And you know, this is part of Code for America, which is a non-profit. And then they go design a solution that then works for people, you know, having lived that experience. So we need to walk a mile in the shoes of the people that we're trying to serve in order to design the solutions, because technology is really not sufficient. We really need to be thinking about this from the individuals, the family's perspective, and particularly women, because exactly as Dr. Bakhshi said, women are definitely you know, not quite looked at, and so women need to be empowered in designing these solutions. Thank you. I actually just want to say one other thing, which is on the shock response, on the 2, you know, and we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but there are 2 big, we live in an age of great change right now. We have the twin crises. We have the pandemic, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is this massive crisis, and then we have climate change as well. So in order to build these solutions, it is really, really important for us to be designing shock responsive systems. And to me, Aadhaar 2.0 and this whole first mile, the first mile approach, is putting people at the center, having a human-centered design approach, but thinking about how to serve people really quickly, dynamically, when shocks happen. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Tina, just sharing your thoughts that journey mapping as well as the shock response proof system we should have. So now, finally, at the end of the panel discussion, I would like to ask Dr. Neeraj Mittal that in the next decade, how do you envision the role of Aadhaar for the people's empowerment, and what is your message to the entity which are working toward social inclusion and then empowerment?
It's a great question. I think we need to see 3 kinds of people, right? One is a child who's born today with a mobile in his hand. Another is a maid which works with me who's sufficiently comfortable with WhatsApp, and then a Tudor level tribe living in Nilgiris which have not seen a phone possibly, and they depend on. So I think we have these 3 generations of people with different comfort levels of technology. And when I'm talking of 10 years ahead, I'm going to ignore legal challenges which are there or legal constraints which are there on Aadhaar system, right? I think it should possibly the question of becoming from optional to mandatory might be a good question to see. Whether we can create sandboxes from Aadhaar to for various people to experiment. I think that is another issue which is Aadhaar can become the enabler of all schemes. I mean, and as Sir said in the morning, Mr. Pandey, about why different IDs? Why can't we possibly adopt a system of Estonia where you have a a department ID plus an Aadhaar, you hash them together, you get a one-way hash, and that represents your universal ID for everything. It will lead to proactive governance, predictive governance. I think those are the issues which we can really look forward as we go ahead. enhanced accuracy of data. You know, you enter data once, that question has been raised here, and your address, phone numbers, everything, you know, there, Bakhshi Sahab said that, you know, they can all be pulled together. Data empowerment and, you know, the protection architecture, which is being, in advanced stages, I think talks of the children who are born with mobile today, where they can go and say, I want this field, my date of birth to be shared with so-and-so person for so-and-so time for this and this purpose, right? They have to be aware of these technologies who can do that. But, you know, that is the kind of granularity Aadhaar can really enable. Finally, I'll just give one example and, you know, highlight and something where I think Aadhaar can give us the next round of gains is by compulsorily possibly linking it to death. Because just as exclusion is a bad thing when you are alive, exclusion is critical when you are dead. And there are many schemes, where people are getting benefits for years together, especially pensions, OAPs, etc., where we do not have access to data where we can identify deaths. So I think there are a lot of, areas for improvement, and I think all these will help in helping all these three generations. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Neeraj Mittal. And now we are privileged to have Mr. Amitabh Kant, CEO of NITI Aayog, with us. And so, sir, I'll just tell about, as such, he doesn't require an introduction in this audience, but still, Mr. Amitabh Kant is a graduate in economics from St. Stephen Valley and 1980 batch of IS officer. And he's author of the Branding India, an Incredible Story, and has been a key driver of Make in India, Startup India, Incredible India, and God's Own Country campaign, which positioned branded India and Kerala state as a leading tourism destination. And prior to that, he was Secretary, Department of Industry Policy and Promotion. And of course, under his guidance, NITI Aayog is working towards inclusive growth and empowerment of the people. So I request Mr. Kant to give a keynote address and maybe whatever we have discussed. Maybe so whatever you're comfortable, maybe from here also. Yeah. So maybe, sir, you can.
Yeah.
So please, a round of applause.
Yeah, so let me first begin by congratulating CEO UIDAI and his entire team for this very unique initiative of Aadhaar 2.0 and asking everybody to think afresh and really think in a revolutionary manner on how we can usher in the next era of digital identity and smart governance and how we can really use technology to leapfrog in many, many ways. I found this panel discussion really fascinating because a lot of very unique ideas, very full of vibrancy and dynamism. A lot of thoughts have been generated. I think we've given enough work for the CEO UIDAI and his team to work on. My own experience, I was actually, as a young officer, working in the traditional fisheries sector of Kerala. And my job was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen. And we started giving them new technology in terms of, we formed their self-help groups. We gave them new crafts, which are fiberglass crafts, which enable them to go much further into the sea. We brought outboard motors for the first time. They could get a higher catch. We gave them new fishing nets, which were then known as disco nets in Kerala. But the biggest challenge I faced in that whole job was opening the bank accounts of traditional fishermen. It used to take me 8 to 9 months chasing bank managers. Know your customer was a nightmare. And it was very important to open bank accounts because fishermen were prone to drinking away everything that they caught in the morning. And we had introduced beach level auctioning. But chasing bank managers was the toughest job I've ever come across in my entire career of over 40 years plus. And opening their bank accounts was really the toughest job. When this you look at now, 2-3 years back, I opened my bank account, a new bank account, using my biometric. It took me less than a minute. So the paradigm shift has been 9 months to 1 minute. That has been the transformation journey of India. And, you know, that is, one must understand this paradigm shift, and the concept of unique digital identity has been at the core of such a transformation. You know, when demonetization happened, actually I was asked to drive this whole digitization process. I just picked up and asked to drive it. And the Prime Minister then asked me to do, you know, you have to nudge people. And that time there were feature phones, there were a whole lot of challenges. Pawan also worked with me, a number of very dynamic people worked with me. And one of the things about nudging was the PM said that you do, you know, 100 digital melas in 100 days in 100 cities of India. So it was, you know, we tried to convince him that this is not feasible, you know, doing 100 digital melas in 100 cities in 100 days. But, you know, it's very, you know, Prime Minister had made up his mind, and then he said digitization and digital payments is the key, and then we had to develop BMAP. We drove this, and we did 100 digital melas in 100 days. And I tell you, my personal view is that if we hadn't done this, we would not have driven the UPI, we would not have driven digital payments. But, you know, this real success of the Aadhaar really is highlighted by the fact that, you know, 100% farmers have linked Aadhaar to receive benefits. You know, look back to the time when I had started my career. You know, money used to be transferred from central government to state government to villages to panchayats. One of our prime ministers said only 15% reaches the poor. Now, at the peak of the crisis of COVID, we could transfer money to such a vast segment of our population without any leakages. And almost 71 crore citizens were able to avail rations because of it. From what Neeraj and all have done, 35 crores have used Aadhaar to avail cooking gas and LPG subsidy. You know, 120 crore bank accounts of India are linked to Aadhaar. Not a single paisa of leakage anymore in DBT. Almost 1.8 lakh crores Indian rupee have been saved as a result of the system of unique identity. So all this is the efficiency which has been brought into the government, you know, from income tax filings to vaccination, and from the unique health IDs to bank account. Aadhaar is the one common link which opens up a vast amount of opportunities and services to the citizens of India. And that has been absolutely enormous. The second point I want to make is that when we started doing this UPI, I mean, we were very, very skeptical about it in the initial process. But look at this. I mean, and I work on another program which is called the Aspirational District Program, where we work on about 115 the most backward districts of India. And these are really far-flung districts of India, very, very difficult to reach. And my belief after covering about 80% of those districts is that it's far more important to have, you know, use technology, have digital infrastructure rather than physical infrastructure. India has to leapfrog. So when we started UPI, you know, we were very skeptical, but it's become a way of life for millions. You know, the new data, if you look at it, the October data of UPI, 80% transactions on UPI are peer-to-peer. And what it shows is that it is actually reflecting a replacement of cash. And, you know, over October figure, 4.2 billion transactions, over US dollar 103 billion in October. And therefore, you know, this platform approach in conceptualizing UPI, this has resulted in top-class payment products being developed by private sector on top of it. And that, to my mind, is really the key. That government creates the platform. On top of that, you allow private sector to innovate. And that is the crux. If India has to move forward in all these areas, the private sector will have to be the driver, and that Aadhaar must realize, that the private sector will have to do all the innovation and heavy lifting. Now look at this, you know, I mean, all this, once we had all these payment apps on top of this UPI, you had the Google Pay, you have the Paytm, you have the Phone Pay, all that. after the payment, with payment problem getting solved, the focus shifted towards lending on both consumer and MSME-based lending. Now, fintech has allowed innovation, allowing new models to come up based on flow-based lending. So all these new companies, all these new startups you see, whether it's Lending Card, whether it's Pine Lab, whether it's MobiQuick, all these are doing flow-based lending. And once this lending challenge was solved, they moved to personal finance. And with sufficient comfort, payment and lending, a huge focus on personal finance, money management, investments and trading. And all this must be realized. Because again, you have a plethora of top-class entities which have come up in this space. You look at Zerodha, you look at Grow, you look at Upstock, and these are all young startups, which are revolutionizing this whole space of personal management. And they have created an ecosystem of modern investment apps, really top class. They are taking India forward, they're taking India to another level. And that is because of the private sector. Now, the third set, what we are witnessing now is the emergence of financial products which target even the more complex segments. The new insurance tech companies, such as, you look at Digit, you look at Acko, these are greatly simplifying insurance, covering end-to-end life cycle of origination, underwriting, claims, and selection. All this is being done by young startups. So what has happened is that because of Aadhaar, on top of UPI, you've had all these private sector young startups disrupting the entire system. I mean, what has Zerodha done? It has enabled everybody to play in the stock market, young people to actually become a player. What has PhonePe or BharatPe, all of them have done? Or look at what insurance tech companies such as Digit and Acko, they are doing. They're just simplifying insurance thanks to Aadhaar. So what we are seeing is that the platform approach taken by India, the fintech ecosystem is leapfrogging and is actually fulfilling the aspirations of 1.3 billion Indians. And it is only, and this is really the key to my mind, that Aadhaar will succeed as long as there is public-private partnership, there is an enabling policy ecosystem, the new generation of young entrepreneurs will evolve, and therefore what we've seen is that this change of evolution from opening of bank accounts to availing niche financial services, the bedrock of all this is the unique digital identity, and that is Aadhaar. That is the crux. And therefore, if you look at all this, what India has achieved has been enormous, and one doesn't need to spread about this. But my belief after doing this aspirational district program is really that India needs to really technologically leapfrog. It's not possible. The challenge for India is really to grow at high rates of about 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, year after year, year after year, for 3 decades or more, to be able to lift a very young population above the poverty line. We are passing through a window of demographic transition, which rarely happens in history. We've grown at those rates, but we've grown for limited periods of 5 to 6 years. So what we need is to grow at high rates. And that growth of high rate, to my mind, is possible only if we technologically leapfrog. If you keep saying that I'm going to repeat the same story which United States did in 1920s by making only roads, it'll take you another 100 years. It's not possible. So you need to really technologically leapfrog. And my second belief is that it's not possible to technologically leapfrog without becoming data intelligent. You are data rich. What Aadhaar has enabled us to do is to really become data rich, but you need to become data intelligent. And therefore, Aadhaar initiative has been seminal in ushering in the whole new era of data, but with all considerations of privacy, security, and other relevant legal compliance requirements, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytical tools have to be leveraged to really enable the judicious use of anonymized data. And this will help us to transition from data-rich to data-intelligent country, and will have great implication and open up a wide range of applications. My second belief is that it's not possible. I mean, at all these districts, I feel that it's more important to provide people with a whole lot of technological apps, provide people all these, you know, the digital infrastructure rather than the physical infrastructure. My second belief is that it's not possible for India to grow at high rates for long periods of time without a huge focus on health, improvement in health outcomes, learning outcomes, and a world-class, totally a world-class social protection scheme. And all these three are possible only under Aadhaar 2.0. I think, let me tell you that Aadhaar 2.0, the focus has to be how do we improve learning outcomes, health outcomes, and how do we create a world-class social protection scheme. This, to my mind, is really the crux of it all, because it's not possible to sustain this growth level for long periods without enhancing. I mean, you can't have a situation where you have vast segment of your population in class 8 not being able to study, not being able to understand class 2 maths and class 3. I think it'll be possible to use artificial intelligence, machine learning today to be able to put focused attention on people who are remaining behind and put focus on this. Secondly, what PMJYS demonstrated is that it's possible. We are running the biggest health insurance scheme in the world. 500 million Indians, I mean, that's more than the population of United States, Europe, and Mexico put together. And it's you know, people, it's a health insurance scheme where you can be living in Bihar, moving to Tamil Nadu, and from Tamil Nadu to Kerala, you will carry your health insurance scheme with you. Now, all this is possible because of Aadhaar, nothing else but Aadhaar. Now, so to my mind, health and education has to be the bedrock on which we need to grow. And thirdly, building up a top-class, world-class social protection scheme on which Dr. Tina spoke at length. And to my mind, this has to be about sharing of data with other departments. There has to be a dynamic social registry. A lot of work on this is going on in NITI Aayog. We believe that building a world-class social registry scheme is really the key. And the last point I want to touch upon is really about my belief in aspirational district is that technology is key. But technology has to be managed, as Neeraj had said in the initial bit. There is a very key challenge of managing the change. And irrespective of the Supreme Court judgment, sharing of data is critical between departments. Without that, we will not benefit from Aadhaar at all. And that is really the crux, that all government departments must share data with each other so as to enable the real benefits of Aadhaar to flow in. And Aadhaar 2.0 really has to be the leapfrogging of India as a country which benefits greatly through health, education, and social identity, a world-class social identity scheme. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, sir, and for this thought-provoking and inspiration thought, sir. So, thank you very much, and maybe Dipali, you can over to you.
Thank you, sir, for this fascinating panel discussion. And now I request Mr. Sumnesh Joshi to present the mementos to our keynote speaker, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Mr. Neeraj Mittal. To Mr. Pawan Bakhshi. To Mr. K.P. Vinod. And to Dr. Tina George. Thank you, sir. I now request Mr. Amitabh Kant to present the memento to our moderator, Mr. Sumnesh Joshi, please.
Just because we have positive time, maybe we can take only 1 or 2 questions. If, yeah. So, Mike.
Thank you. It's a suggestion more than a question. You know, lack of information or communication is as much a bigger factor of exclusion and not really doing inclusion as much as technology. Couple of points that got mentioned, like Dr. Bakhshi mentioned, another person had talked about earlier, was lost Aadhaar, forgotten Aadhaar. How do you handle? You know, these mechanisms exist in the system since 2012, probably even earlier. So I think what UIDAI should focus as part of Aadhaar 2.0 is an extra amount of communication for people to really know a lot of things about Aadhaar, how to interact with Aadhaar and things like that. That should be a huge focus, is what I believe, as part of Aadhaar 2.0. Thank you.
So one last question, maybe we can have.
This is Brahmanand from NEGD. So most of the states are now moving from individual digital identity to the family-based ID. So why can't we try to move in Aadhaar 2.0, one of the outcome that it can move from individual ID to family ID, covering entire country?
So that is something which is, I think it is an architectural issue which I think Aadhaar took in its initial days, that it's an individual identity, and linking it to family is something which was not envisaged at that time. But I think over the period of time, many states have recognized that linking these at the back end on a family basis is something which is important. So I think it could be a question which Aadhaar 2.0 can take up. But I think states individually are, working around ways to link families together. For example, in Tamil Nadu, we are thinking of a Makkal number. In Karnataka, there is a similar program. In Rajasthan, there is a similar program. So I think there is a definite need. Possibly, I think Aadhaar 2.0 can deliberate upon it and see if it can be a national.
Can I just come in on the family ID question? So this is very similar to what was spoken about today on the health identification. This is a layer on top. And so when you build a dynamic social registry, the lowest atomic component is the household. So it's either the assistance unit is either the individual, the family, or the household. So if you define what the family or the household is, and households are dynamic, people move in and out. Once you can define that, then you can attach socioeconomic data to it, and that's how you build a social registry. So it is very much an important component, and that's why states, Karnataka has Kutumba, and Tamil Nadu, and so forth. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude the second session. The session has been quite intriguing and has pragmatically analyzed the pivotal role played by digital identity and data towards empowerment and growth. So may I request for another round of applause, a wholehearted one once again, please, for our panelist and keynote speaker.